Today we're going to go through the steps on how to install a mobile ham radio or GMRS radio along with a Fender mounted antenna just like this one. Stay tuned. So here's the pile of parts I'm going to be installing today. I've got an Ocean 2-meter 440 mobile radio with the ability to have the head remote from the body. And then my antenna is this Tram model 1180 2-meter 440 NMO antenna. And there's all the info on the tag there. And then moving up to my coax and NMO coax with the NMO piece already installed. That's the model 1252, and the FME stands for this little nice connector here. You can run this through your firewall, and then the PL259 just screws right on. And then here is the actual L bracket mount. As you can see, I'm going to have to drill 3 holes in my Fender and it will mount right up. And all of these, this antenna kit I got on got from the Antenna Farm. It's a universal kit that they sell. Pretty cheap. I think it was less than $30. I bought it quite a while ago and I've had it sitting around, and now I finally have a vehicle to put it on. Here are the electrical components that we're going to need. Starting at the bottom right, this is the little fuse holder. Got a little butane torch lighter to melt the heat shrink tubing to protect my connections. I've got a multimeter for testing. Got my 12 gauge red wire for positive, 12 gauge black wire for negative, a little bit of a little roll of electrical tape. I've got my ring terminals, my butt connectors, and these are both weatherproof. They have the these are both weatherproof connectors. And then I've got my wire strippers. And then I've just got a box of miscellaneous sized heat shrink that is all different colors. And let's move over to some of the tools that we're going to be using today. You don't necessarily need power tools for this job. You will need a drill and a drill bit small enough to drill the holes for the mount. But you don't necessarily need an impact wrench. I'm just going to be using it to take a dash piece out that's not even necessary to take out, just so I can video the process a little easier. And you'll just need some drill bits. I've got a step drill bit that is a little bit easier to use to get to drill one of the bigger holes. And these are the hand tools that are possibly going to be required today. Phillips screwdriver. Of course, you'll need a wire cutters. You may need a needle nose pliers. I've got 2 different sizes. And the other thing that you'll need is a very simple socket set or a set of wrenches. And that's really about it on this install for the tools. So our first step that we're going to do is take this little L bracket and Sharpie and mark on the Fender where it needs to go. Now, before, I've done a quick little mock-up on where I wanted the antenna to go. So I'm thinking right about here is going to be good. I've got to make sure to leave enough space between the bracket and the Fender for the NMO mount to stick through the bottom. And I don't need that much, but this looks like it's about right. And I just took the Sharpie and marked the three holes that I needed to drill. And that should be a pretty easy step. Now I need to grab the drill. Now the bit that I'm using is a 3/32 drill bit. and just need to drill these holes. Now that the holes are drilled, I'm going to go ahead and mount up the L bracket, and we'll proceed on to the next step. Now to mount this L bracket, I am just going to use a regular Phillips head screwdriver. I don't necessarily want to use an impact or a drill to drive these in and strip these holes out. Make sure all your screws are tightened down. You don't want this thing falling off or anything like that, but don't over tighten them to where you strip the hole out. Because then you got to drill some more holes. And I really don't need any extra holes in this thing. Alright, good and secure. Now let's go ahead and feed the coax through up top, and we'll kind of see where we're at on clearance. Be careful not to mar up the jacket on your coax. Feed it through nice and easily without kinking it. Now this little piece up top just unscrews off, so you can finish feeding this into the hole. And it just pops in there like so. And I'm going to orient my coax so it will easily be able to feed right down and underneath the hood. And I'm going to go ahead and screw this piece back on here, just loosely for now. And I'll finish torquing that down later. And I'm going to check for any kind of clearance issues on the hood. I'm going to wind this, wrap this back up a little bit. And just gently, I'm going to grab a bread tie. Stick the little bread tie that came with this back on here to keep this all together and kind of out of my way. This cable is going to run down into this area, and I'm concerned about this area right here for clearance on the coax. It'll bend a little bit, but I don't want to kink it. And I'm going to go ahead and lower the hood and check that. It looks like it'll fit, but it's a little bit of a tight fit. Have to be careful when opening and closing the hood that don't rub the jacket off of the coax. I do believe with as tight of a fit as this is, I'm going to wrap some electrical tape in this area, quite a bit of it. That way it's rubbing on the hood and the fender are rubbing on the electrical tape and not the coax, and I'll just have to keep an eye on this every so often to make sure that it's not coming apart. I'm going to go ahead and leave the coax bundled, but I'm going to just set it down to the side until I get my hole in the firewall drilled and get the power cables run. Now we're going to move to the inside of the vehicle, and we're going to have to try and drill some holes into the firewall. As you can see, it looks like I've already got one that somebody drilled at some point in time. So I'm probably going to use that one and I need to use a separate one for my power and ground wires, because you don't necessarily want to run your coax and your power wire right next to each other. It can cause some interesting issues. I don't know that I'm going to be able to film this while trying to do it, because I'm going to need all the room that I can get to fit myself underneath this dash. Alright, I've got both my holes drilled. As you can see, there's one down there in the bottom, and the other one is kind of behind the brake booster. Now, after you drill the holes, you'll want to put a little rubber grommet in that hole so you're not so your cables are not going to rub right on that sharp metal and wear right through and cause shorts or any other crazy stuff to happen. Alright, I've got the holes drilled and the grommets put in, and now I can start running my cabling. Now, these grommets are extremely necessary because you don't want your wires to chafe through the jacket, and you'll end up getting a short, or you'll end up having some really funny stuff happen with your radio every time you try and transmit. So I'm going to go ahead and feed the wire in through the outside, and you should see it come right through the bottom hole. Now that the wire is poked through, I'm going to go ahead and pull a good little bit of it in, making sure on the outside that my wire is not getting tangled. Alright, now I'm going to attempt to run this wire underneath the carpet into this panel, go behind it, and then down underneath this panel, and then straight up and under the seat, which is where I'm going to put my radio. And there's plenty of room underneath that seat to stick the base of my radio. Need to go ahead and take these 3 screws out. And then this panel just pops out. You just got to pull on it a little bit. And go ahead and set it aside. And as you can see, there's a nice little channel that they do run some factory wiring through. So I'm going to run my power wires right in this channel. Got to be sure to avoid these holes, because that is where this little panel, these sit in those holes. So you want to make sure your wires are clear of that hole, otherwise you're going to mess your wiring up pretty quickly. And next, we want to take this panel off, and it just pops right off. There's no screws or anything on that one. Let's set it aside. And this is the location where a lot of your factory wiring is, so just be cautious not to tear any of that up. Now let's get our wiring tucked in behind this carpet. And run it down and around some of the factory wiring. We're going to continue running this in this channel, and to avoid those little holes, I'm going to just try and tuck this wiring as close as I can to this weather stripping. And I'll have to be extremely careful when I put that panel back in, that I make sure and use like a flathead screwdriver or something to push my wiring out of the way. But from here, I'm just going to run my wiring, shove it up under the seat, and make sure I have enough. Looks like I've got plenty. Now we're going to have to go ahead and put our Anderson power poles or whatever. I would suggest putting some kind of connector on the end of this. It doesn't really matter what it is, if it's an Anderson power pole, a spade connector, just something. That way you're not directly connected to your radio, and if you want to change your radio in the future, you can just unplug it, plug a different one in. Trim off just a little bit of wire. And strip just a little bit of this back, like so. Throw on your heat shrink, and this is mainly just for a little help with strain relief, and cover up the back part of this connector a little bit, like so. And then get your special crimpers ready, and you'll need a set of crimpers like this. These are power pole crimpers. They work great. They're just the cheapy ones, they're nothing special. And there we go, that's all crimped. Let's get heat shrink on here. I'm going to hit it with a torch real quick. Hit this with a torch, making sure that you've got it covered, but you're not too far up the connector. Good to go on that, and then let's go ahead and just slip the connector on. Like so. It just pushes on until it clicks. Now let's do the same with the negative cable. And ideally, I would like the cables to be roughly about the same length. Good thing about these connectors is if you forget, like I just did, to put the heat shrink on, it fits right over top too. And the way these typically go is if you look at them with this little notch up, the positive is supposed to be on your right and the negative is supposed to be on your left. And these just slide together and you've got a solid connector. And now I'm just going to take these and slide them up underneath the seat like so, and I'm going to reinstall this piece. Pop this little piece back on, and because we're not running the coax that direction, it's going to run a different direction. Now it's time for this piece. And as I said before, you want to make sure that the holes are clear. Alright, we're all good to go there, and those won't be very noticeable. If you need to, you can tape them up with black tape or black electrical tape or whatever you want, but they won't be getting snagged by anybody. Alright, need to go ahead and measure out and trim off the excess wire. I'm not going to strip it yet, I'm just going to trim it off, that way I can get the excess wire out of my way. And we need to make sure we have enough to kind of tuck this and run this back behind everything so it's out of the way. And I am, just for the sake of being easy and not creating any kind of a ground loop, I am going to run the ground wire right back to the negative lug on the battery. And while I'm looking at it, before I put any kind of connectors on, I'm going to go ahead and snake these down and around. But that should work just fine, just like so. Now let's go ahead and start running this coax. And we're going to go ahead and take this end and shove it right through the firewall. I want to definitely make sure that we're extremely careful and not to kink this. And we want to make sure that we leave a little bit of slack so this can just kind of easily run down and in there. I'm probably going to zip tie this to this mount just to kind of make sure that we always have enough slack. Now we're going to actually run underneath here and just tuck under here and right underneath the seat, and any of the excess I'm just going to coil up and zip tie kind of out of the way. But I want to make sure that I run kind of tucked behind the carpet a little bit, and there's a little cutout right here that I can kind of run and shoot straight underneath of here. There's enough space that I can just tuck the cable up under there with my fingers pretty easily. At some point in time, it looks like someone had an amp or something under the seat, because these are RCA cables that also go under there. Alright, I've got the coax run all the way out, and I'm going to go ahead and coil it up right quick. And I'm going to leave just a little bit of a pigtail, and I'm just going to run a quick little piece of electrical tape around it. Alright. Got electrical tape around one end. I go ahead and do it around the other. so. And having your coax coiled like this isn't going to cause any issues. Just trying to be nice and neat. If anything, it's going to help with not having some RFI on the coax. It'll almost act as a very simple RF choke or something like that. And last but not least, we got to put this end on, and these are very simple. You just insert it and screw it on, because the way this works, there's a little plug there, and there's essentially another plug on the side. They just go together, twist, and you'll want to grab like a pair of pliers or something, kind of give that a little torque. Let's go ahead and finish up the power portion of it. So that is going to go right on that post. This end is going to connect with a butt connector to the red cable. Going to use a weather tight cable, and I'll probably use a little bit of heat shrink also to help. Alright, we'll want to throw our heat shrink on first. Slide my heat shrink all the way up in there, and we're going to quickly hit it with a torch. Alright, we have probably a mostly weather tight connection, at least good enough for being under the hood. And I'm not going to connect this quite yet. I'm going to do my ground first. Alright, looks like it's all good and sealed up. Now let's go ahead and connect these up, and you would only want to connect these up at this point if you've got connectors on the other end and you know they're not going to be touching any kind of metal, grounding out to anything, or sparking, or anything like that. Now these terminals are 7/16. Alright, that one's good. And I'll make sure I don't have a fuse in this fuse holder quite yet. I'm just going to throw a 25 amp fuse in here. My radio's not supposed to pull more than 20-21 amps. So I'll throw a 25 in here to give it a little bit of padding. And the wire can very easily handle it, so it's not a big deal. Alright, the wiring part is done. Now let's pop the radio under the seat and see about getting the head of the radio mounted and the cabling run for it. So as you can see, I have this mounted on a board. That way, in case I have this mounted on a board just in case any kind of water would happen to get into the floorboard. That way this radio wouldn't be sitting directly in it. I also have this thing mounted upside down. That way we can get plenty of airflow on these cooling fins. And maybe the top firing speakers that are in between this gap might be able to be loud enough for me to hear without having to run an external speaker and try to mount it somewhere. Alright, we're plugged in. All good to go there. And I am just gonna, this mess is just gonna sit right under this seat, and when I put my floor mat back right here, it will keep it from sliding backwards. But I'm gonna pull this back out so I can have access to it. This is a special cable I made to be able to run the head of my radio a little bit further away from it. When these radios were new, they did ship with a remote head cable with them. I bought this radio used, and it didn't come with the mount, the mobile mount, or the remote head cable or anything like that. So I had to look at the wiring. It is not a standard Ethernet cable. The wiring is different on each side. There are a couple of cables that are flipped, or a couple of little wires inside the cable that are flipped. And I noticed that and figured that out by looking at the factory cable that came with it. And I was able to just remake this cable. And I do believe it matters on which end plugs into what. So I left it as this end being able to plug into my radio, and this end being able to plug into the head of it. Very easy to distinguish the two. And it just plugs right in the front, and that's it. Okay, so I decided to run my remote head cable up in essentially the same direction and alongside my antenna cable. I don't necessarily want to do that, but I made my cable a little bit too short to run on the other side of the center console. So I'm going to try this out. If it causes any problems, I'll make a new cable. I'll make a new longer cable and put it on the other side of the center console. Essentially, it'll run through a hole in the back here and just poke right through and plug into the head of the radio. My overall plan is to have the radio head mounted right there. That way I can see it very easily from the driver's seat. And my microphone will kind of be, my cable will come out and be out of the way. And I kind of looked around, there's not really any other good spot to either mount a whole radio or just the radio head without taking the whole dash apart. This is probably the easiest spot. Now this radio head, I did kind of make these, I bought some brackets and then bent them the way I needed to, and then mounted them to the back of the head of the radio. And this little piece of plastic right here is the actual like remote head mount, and the cable runs right through this big hole here and plugs right into the back of the radio, or right into the back of the head. Now I just need to pop a hole. Alright, I've got my hole popped in there. Let's sweep all this junk out of there, and I should be able to feed my cable right up through from behind without having to take anything apart, hopefully. Little pro tip: if you're having trouble snaking something kind of up and around, just take a piece of scrap wire and feed it through the other way, tape it to what you're trying to feed up through the back, and you should be able to pull it right through. I've got this pulled up and through the hole. Now I just have to mount the head of my radio in here and plug it in, and it should be good to go. And we'll have to throw the antenna on and give it a test. I was able to use a flexible shaft on my drill to sneak a couple screws in behind that. And now it's mounted nice and solid. Let's go ahead and jump back under the hood and run the ground strap and get this all buttoned up. Now this ground strap, we're just going to take it and mount it on one of these screws, probably that one. And we're going to run it to another bolt on the body. Well, that's good. Now let's go ahead and find a spot for this end. This end, we're actually going to put it right there. I happen to have a bolt or screw that will thread right into that already pre-threaded hole. So I'm just going to grab a washer and a screwdriver and put it in there. And let's go ahead and get this torqued. Now with this, you just need essentially just a big pair of pliers. And you don't need to torque it a ton, but enough that it's good and solid. Alright, that should be enough. I'm gonna go ahead and screw the antenna back on, and this job is done. The only other thing I need to do yet is put in a hand mic holder, but I'll do that a little bit later. I'm not really sure where I'm going to put it yet, so I will figure that out, and probably either going to be double-sided tape to the dash or just a quick couple of screws and get it mounted up out of the way. All of these steps and everything will also work for CB radio and GMRS, not just ham radio. So if you're installing a GMRS radio, the steps are almost identical. You can get antennas that are NMO mount, and all the steps are essentially the same. Some of the GMRS radios do have remote heads, some don't. Some of the radios from Midland actually have the head of the radio built into the microphone, and that design works pretty good if you want to mount the smaller box somewhere like underneath your seat and just run the microphone up to the dash. But the antenna and everything else will be exactly the same steps for doing any kind of a Fender mount, or just any kind of antenna install. Thanks for watching. If you have anything you'd like to say, drop it down in the comments. Please check out the video I have linked up here in the corner. I think you'll like it. It will be another project video. Thanks for watching. 73.